Hello again. Welcome to this week's episode of Leadership Synergized. I'm Kevin Smith. And as last week, I'm so pleased to have our good friend, Dr. Jerry Mason, join us. If you missed last week's episode, check us out on YouTube, LinkedIn, or on Facebook. Dr. Mason brought a lot of wisdom last week, and we're going to pick right up where we left off this week. Dr. Mason, my friend, good to see you again. Thank you for coming back.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Enjoyed it.
Week were graceful, and I'm so grateful. You talked about the need for vulnerability and transparency. And as we closed out last week's session, we were talking about the value of relationships as a leader. And you described, I really haven't heard it put this way prior to, but I loved it. I think it just wraps a bow around the difference between leadership and management is those relationship development pieces. You talked about an executive training program or training program you went through. What was the hardest thing for you to adjust to once you recognized, developed the focus or the commitment that you were going to focus even further on those relationships in your roles?
The hardest thing is the start of the journey of transformation. And that begins with self-awareness. And that training program I went through was with a company called Giant Worldwide. And we could spend an entire session talking about that company and their mission. It's so great. But they put up a mirror in front of me to show me who I am as a leader. And it started from a personality framework and teaching your hardwiring and how your personality manages self. And the hardest thing for me was accepting that. There are studies that show that 95% of people believe they're self-aware, but only 15% actually are. That's a staggering gap from 15% to 95% between belief and reality. So that difficulty for me was I had a choice. They made me painfully self-aware of who I was as a leader, and from a personality perspective as an immature leader, because I didn't have the right understanding of self and how to manage my own leadership. I had a decision to make: either accept it and do something about it, or deny it and put up walls and say, nope, that's not me. I'm better than that. You misunderstand. And I chose to accept it and say, you're right. Help me change.
Building on that a little bit, you and I are both huge followers of Dr. John Maxwell. One of the things that jumped out at me as you're speaking, Dr. Maxwell, very consistent in stating either in his writing or in his programming, is we see others as we see ourselves. And it just has one wonder, I would think, at least it does me, Dr. Mason, if that's true, and I'm not questioning it because I wholeheartedly believe it's true, the value of being more and more self-aware just grows with every moment, every involvement, every interaction in our lives.
It certainly does. One of the things that makes me think about is my investment in my own personal development has a proportionate result in my leadership of others. It's not development just simply for me for selfish reasons. Yes, I grow and yes, I change, but those changes are demonstrated in my leadership. There's a quote that's been around for decades that you can't pour from an empty cup. And maybe said differently, it's if I'm not healthy, whether that's physical, emotional, whatever the framework is, the makeup of my leadership health, if I'm not healthy, then I cannot be an effective servant for others. And that separator is the leadership.
I think you and I both would agree if we went back 20, 30, or 40 years in our career and we were that same person today, the value we would be bringing to those we're serving and responsible for would be so minute in comparison to where that opportunity is. And I don't say that as a braggart piece, but it's about focused and lifelong learning and just accepting the fact that, and look, Dr. Mason, I have failed more than many when it comes to investing in myself in many ways and for many reasons throughout my younger window of time in the professional arena. And I sometimes worry about educators today. They're pulled so many different ways. There are so many different expectations, some of which they just hear about in the moment when there's a discussion, be it good or bad. but I worry about their opportunity because they're giving so much to others to have that opportunity to give back to themselves. I don't mean that selfishly, and I know you understand exactly where I'm coming from, but if we're not increasing our own value, we're taking away opportunities from others that will interact with tomorrow, the next day.
Absolutely. There's a phrase or a statement out that's been out for a couple of years that keeps increasing, and that's self-care. And there's a lot more education today on the term self-care and how self-care is not selfish. Because I believe that's the stigma, is if you take care of yourself too much and you focus on yourself, then you're not being anything for anybody else. And I think with anything, you can go extreme, one direction or the other, and everything's about balance. But understanding that balance, self-care for the leader is learning how to have the right mental rest, the right physical rest, even the right physical activity and health. These are things that I have failed at so many times in my career and my life's journey, that as I have focused more on them in the last, I'll say the last couple of years at least, because I'm an all or nothing guy. If I'm exercising, and then I'll eat right. But if I stop exercising, then my eating habits tend to follow. It's all or nothing for me. And I've been getting some coaching over the last couple of years of how even small things matter and how dangerous all or nothing mentality can be. One of the things I've noticed in that is the mental rest, the physical rest, the increased physical activity and health. And I am not a specimen of health, but I've improved my eating habits and I've improved my activity level. It has positively impacted my leadership so much because it's given me the stamina that I need to function and to be what I need for my staff and the people that I lead, so that when they come to me, I don't have an empty cup. But if I'm tired and lethargic and sick all of the time, then I don't have anything to give because I need too much care myself. So taking care of ourselves, I think, has to be part of the regimen in that investment of personal development, so that we can be what we need to be for other people.
Thank you so much for sharing. Very, very powerful words of experience and spoken very well. Dr. Mason, you talked about health and self-care, and it just brings the thought of leadership health, leadership development. Who or what tool has played a big part of forming Jerry Mason's leadership toolkit?
Oh, there are so many, more than what I can speak to just in this session today. But I'll tell you, I think where it started, because from there, that was what put me on the journey that I needed to be on. In March of 2003, I got a new manager at the place where I was working. And anytime you're an employee and you get a new boss, there's always a certain anxiety that comes with that. You don't know what that's going to mean, whether or not you're going to click with them or not. And his name is Kelly Huff, and he came in March 3, and I quickly adapted to appreciating his leadership. It was obvious, but there was one key separator between me and him. He was an MBA holder, and I was a college dropout. And to be honest, that scared me so much, because I had actually worked myself into a position that traditionally required a college education to hold. But because of my experience, commitment, loyalty within the company, I was promoted and was really learning a whole lot on the job, trial by fire as it is. And when he come in, I had a lot of anxiety about where this was going to lead. A couple of months in, he asked me, "Hey, where did you go to college?" And in my mind, I thought, this is it. This is the beginning of the end for me, because I'm going to have to tell him I don't deserve a seat at the table because I don't have a college education. And I told him, I said, I didn't. And he said, "No, stop joking around. Tell me the truth. Where'd you go to college?" I said, "Seriously, I dropped out in less than 6 months and I never went back." And his next words for me was a defining moment in my life journey. Instead of criticizing me or judging me or putting me down over it, he looked at me and he said, "You need to get started. You need to do it. You're not too old. You've got it in you. You're worth it. You can do it." And that changed my mindset. And there were things that I think he saw in abilities, possibilities even, that he saw in me at that time that I didn't see in myself. And he spoke life into me in a season where I needed it. And by July of that year, I started while holding a full-time job, I started back to college to formalize my education. It was a game changer for myself and my family.
Individuals committed to leadership, their success many times or their longevity depends on something you just gave a great example on, in my viewpoint, and that is being aware of the moment at hand. Even with those words of statement, I've had individuals that throughout my life, I've been associated with as friends or just in peer aspects that would still turn the other direction rather than go forward with the opportunity. And I'm not criticizing, it's just a choice to be made. But those individuals who have leadership health, leadership heart, a desire in that regard, such as yourself, Dr. Mason, they typically work and pick up. And the moment that opportunity comes, you are probably seeking that opportunity that kind of, for lack of a better word, just came running through the door at you that day. But you certainly recognized it was an opportunity for your future then.
Yeah, it was an opportunity that I didn't know I needed until he said it. And it was the lesson for me, and I have failed at this so many times since, but I have tried to succeed with it. But that lesson for me very deeply was, as a leader, you never truly understand the value of your words and the level of support that you give to the people you're leading. You don't always know in that moment how even a small word may make a big impact.
Said, and it's cliche in some regard, but you don't build those relationships, and I'm sure you would agree that's so valuable for leadership success and valuable for the organization, whatever industry they're in, whatever area of focus, to attain their vision, unless you're connecting. And it's those words, it's what that situation you just described is where connection comes from. And that's true transparency. It's natural transparency from my perspective and my experience that we don't need to plan for, we don't need to strategize, we just need to be ready in the moment when the natural opportunity comes. My friend, we've talked about a lot last week and today. I don't want to get away from talking a bit more about your research study that led to your doctorate recently. You completed your doctorate, I think, in April, if I'm not mistaken. And
That is correct.
you did a research study on leadership, and you had a lot of valuable aspects. When you think back, and if you would just describe for our viewers and listeners just briefly your study, but what's the number one thing that you're taking from that doctorate work and you're using every day moving forward?
So specifically from the research, how I am using that is to engage in the understanding that my behavior as a leader is a predictor in the outcome of the people that I lead. And I'll explain. So the topic of my study was understanding the connection between emotional intelligence and employee turnover. And I did this from a quantitative perspective. Prior to my 2016 training that I went through that I told you last week that really stripped me down to ground zero and rebuilt who I was as a leader. Prior to that, I just simply could not understand. Successful as a team, why do I lose people off my team? I'm a good leader, at least that's what I thought, because I predicated that simply on the idea that we had results, we were on time, under budget, we were successful, the company made money. Why do people leave the team? I just could not understand. And I know that there are exceptions to what I'm about to say. By and large, and I'm not the person that come up with this quote, but it's often quoted that people leave managers, not companies. And with that framework in mind, after I went through that 1-year-long program to reset my ideologies and my philosophies of leadership, I went from that directly into my doctoral studies starting in 2018. And that's when the wheels started turning for me on the connection between everything that I had just learned about personality psychology and understanding how to lead myself so that I can be a better leader for others. The dots started connecting for me pretty quick that the reason why I believed that the reason why I had people leaving my team in spite of our success was because of me. It was because of my leadership. And I had to change as a leader in order to change that.
It was a great study. I was so blessed to have the opportunity to sit in when you defended. You just did such a wonderful job. And there's just so much there that leaders can use in that regard. So thank you for sharing that, Dr. Mason. Dr. Mason, as we head down the home stretch here in this week's episode, what's a word of advice you would have for leaders who may be beginning or maybe still early in their leadership career? What's an experience, a lessons learned, or just a piece of advice that you've taken away throughout your lifetime?
I think I would start with saying the responsibility of leadership is big. And I believe it's often understated. So understand early in your journey of leadership that you're not alone, and don't be afraid to ask for help or seek for advice. It took me many years. Matter of fact, I really didn't start honing this skill good enough until within the last 3 to 5 years. But I would recommend set up a personal board of directors, 3 to 5 people in your life that you trust to speak into you the right things, so that you have somebody you can lean on when you need support, because you're not alone. And one of the worst things we can do as a leader is to not seek for help or advice whenever we need it.
Well said, my friend. Well said. How about you? What's next? What's next for your growth and development?
That's a good question. I believe as of this moment, and I hope I am done, at least from an academic program perspective. But like I said earlier, I will never be done learning. I want to stay on this journey of life and advancing not only my knowledge, but my application. Such a difference between knowledge and application. So I want to have a good balance of both so that I can be the best leader possible for the people that I lead in life. So I'll be a perpetual student of leadership and just humbled with the opportunity to lead and develop other people.
And you'll continue to do a wonderful job and make a huge difference. Dr. Mason, somebody listening or watching wants to reach out and just touch base and gain more from you, or pick up on a topic you've discussed in our last 2 episodes. How can they reach out to you?
From a professional perspective, I would say the best option is LinkedIn or Twitter. I use Twitter to share leadership content. I don't think it is quite as popular as it once was. So I'm actually looking at some options right now on possibly developing a Facebook page or a blog or a podcast in the future, maybe all of the above. I'm not sure. We'll see what happens, but definitely LinkedIn for now. And then they can watch for any advertisements of any changes from there. Love to connect.
Dr. Mason, I can't leave. I have one more question pop into my mind for you. And you've talked and you've been so gracious discussing your journey from where the young Dr. Mason was to where today's Dr. Mason is. If you were sitting right across the table from young Dr. Mason, starting out as a leader with where you sit today, what would you say to him?
I would tell him, avoid the comparison trap. Don't get caught up in it. Be uniquely you and be okay with that.
And love is right at the heart of that. So love self. And I really, not to be over redundant here or be redundant, I love your comment. Leaders are not alone. We're never alone. Love yourself, positive self-talk, but reach out to others like you and I and many others out in the world. We're there. We can share and we can listen in that regard. Dr. Mason, my friend, God bless you again for being with me and all of our viewers and listeners these 2 weeks. So much value add you brought, and I appreciate you from the bottom of my heart, my friend.
I appreciate you, sir. Thank you.
God
it's been an enjoyable time.
God bless you. I'm proud of you for all you represent. You have a great day, sir.
Thanks. You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you. And for watching. Thank you for listening. And remember, you want sustained success and significance in the lives of the people you lead? Find that skill that best fits you. God bless you. We love you.